There are two things that thyroid patients pay way too much attention to. The first is their weight as measured on a scale, and the second is their intake of carbohydrates. I've already explained before why measurements on the scale are so misleading, so today I want to focus on the carbohydrate part. Both of these topics tend to be top of mind for thyroid patients because thyroid dysfunction leads to weight gain. But the attention is still misplaced. The truth is that carbohydrates are essential for thyroid function, and avoiding them may actually make your thyroid worse. But this then begs the question, why do so many experts recommend that you avoid carbohydrates, and how many should you eat each day as a thyroid patient? Let's answer both right now. There are 3 different ways to think about carbohydrates, and most people, including experts, will fall into one of these 3 camps. Group number 1 believes that carbohydrates are dangerous because they are non-essential, and because consuming them leads to insulin resistance, which is a major driver of diseases like heart attack and stroke. Those who fit into this category usually recommend eating diets like carnivore and keto, which makes a lot of sense. Group number 2, on the other hand, recognizes the importance of insulin resistance as a driver of disease, but suggests that the real problem has to do with refined and processed carbohydrates, not the carbohydrates found in real sources of whole foods. Those who fit into this category tend to recommend diets like Whole30 or other whole food-based diets. Group number 3 believes that all sources of carbohydrates are equal and healthy, so you can pretty much just eat whatever you want. We don't even really need to entertain group 3 because you should know by now that processed foods are dangerous to your body and to your thyroid. So there's no possible way that this philosophy can be correct. This just leaves us with group number 1 and group number 2. Group number 1 is highly attracted to thyroid patients because of the thyroid weight gain connection, and the fact that low carbohydrate diets are thought to be associated with better and more rapid weight loss compared to other diets. While it is certainly true that you can lose weight on a low carb diet, there's nothing magical about it. And the rapid weight loss associated with going low carb is almost always related to fluid mass, not to fat mass. The problem with this philosophy is twofold. While carbohydrates are not technically essential for life, they happen to be essential if you want your thyroid to function optimally. And number 2 is that reducing your carbohydrate intake can lower T3 levels, which can ultimately make your thyroid function worse. This is not some theoretical or hypothetical problem either. It's been shown in several studies, and I'll share one with you below right now. One crossover study evaluated 11 healthy patients to see the impact that the ketogenic diet and a high carbohydrate, low fat diet had on resting metabolic rate and thyroid function. This study found that people using the ketogenic diet saw more weight loss compared to the high carbohydrate group, but they also found the following changes in thyroid function. Plasma T3 levels were significantly lower, there was an increase in free T4, and the TSH level remained the same. If you're familiar with thyroid lab testing analysis, then you'll know that a rise in T4 and a drop in T3 is consistent with a thyroid conversion problem. This reduction in thyroid conversion is thought to be used by the body as a defense mechanism to preserve metabolism. It's also the very same pattern that is seen in people who are chronically ill and in those who are undergoing starvation. While this is just one study, there are plenty of other studies and they all point in the same direction, while suggesting that reducing carbohydrates negatively impacts thyroid function. To illustrate this point further, let's take a look at a real-world example. The first is of a popular carnivore promoting YouTuber named Paul Saladino, MD. As an expert and online personality, he has shared his experiences throughout the year, including a list of his lab tests. More recently, his journey has included the reintroduction of carbohydrates to the tune of about 200 to 300 grams per day after having avoided them for several years. Some of the changes that he's seen in his own lab work after the reintroduction of these carbohydrates in the form of fruits, fruit juice, and honey include the following. A significant decrease in sex hormone binding globulin by about 1/2. A significant rise in free testosterone. A decrease in his TSH, which was previously a high normal, and a rise in his free T3. Subjectively, he's also noted an increase in his energy levels around this time, as well as objectively a rise in his basal body temperature. What makes this case study so interesting is that all of these positive changes occurred without impacting his insulin, which remained undetectable both before and after the change. This appears to throw a massive wrench in the philosophy of those who follow the carnivore diet, which suggests that all carbohydrates, but especially those from fruit juices and fruits, always result in insulin resistance and damage to the body. While this is just a simple case report and an N of 1, his experience does support the idea, which is supported in the studies that we referenced previously, that carbohydrates are needed for thyroid function. And by consuming them, you can actually see a change in your thyroid hormone levels. We can't use his data to make bold claims about every individual, but we can use it to make some general recommendations, which is what I want to do next. So how many carbohydrates does your thyroid need if you want it to function optimally? And the answer here depends on a few factors. The first is whether or not you have insulin resistance. If you do, you're going to want to start on the lower end. The second has to do with your activity level. In general, the more active you are, the more tolerant you are to carbohydrates. And the last has to do with your genetics, which is a wild card. There will always be some people who just don't fit the mold, and they'll be able to get by with excessively high doses of carbohydrates or excessively low doses of carbohydrates without really impacting their physiology. But these people represent the exception, not the rule. Each of these variables will impact how many carbohydrates you should have, but at baseline, my recommendation is that all thyroid patients should have at least 100 grams of carbohydrates each day. And this includes, by the way, even those with prediabetes, diabetes, and any form of insulin resistance. To put this 100 gram recommendation into context, here's a list of foods and their corresponding carbohydrate content. 1 cup of blueberries contains 21 grams. 1 cup of orange juice contains 26 grams. 1 tablespoon of honey contains 17 grams. 1 medium-sized potato with the skin on contains about 26 grams, and 1 banana contains 27 grams. This means that on the low end, you should have no problem hitting your daily recommended intake of 3 to 5 servings of fruit each day. And the number just goes up from here depending on how active you are and whether or not you have insulin resistance. But before you run out and start pounding down carbohydrates, you need to know this one thing. The source of your carbohydrates matters. Having a budget of 100 grams of carbohydrates each day doesn't give you free rein to go run out there and start pounding down things like candy bars, pizzas, pastries, cakes, and any other processed foods. Yes, these foods do contain carbohydrates, but they contain processed and refined sources that should be avoided. Instead of these sources, here are the types of carbohydrates you should be consuming. Whole foods of all types, fresh or frozen fruits, fresh or frozen vegetables, including, by the way, starchy vegetables, natural sweeteners such as honey, agave, date syrup, and maple syrup, and 100% fresh squeezed fruit juice, including juices like orange juice, apple juice, pomegranate juice, and so on. Some thyroid patients have an immediate knee-jerk reaction when they hear this to automatically assume that eating this way will somehow cause them to gain weight. But I can assure you that it won't, and I have several studies to prove it. Here's one that shows that fruit has an anti-obesity effect. Here's another showing that fruit intake is inversely associated with weight gain over 4 years. In other words, the more fruit you eat, the leaner you are. Here's one showing the consumption of fruit juices does not cause weight gain in children and is not associated with type 2 diabetes in adults. And here's one showing that adult consumers of 100% fruit juices, such as orange juice, have a lower BMI and better metabolic markers compared to those who do not consume them. The bottom line, don't be afraid of carbohydrates if you have hypothyroidism, even if you have diabetes or insulin resistance. While it may seem counterintuitive at first, consuming more carbohydrates will help you lose weight by increasing and optimizing your thyroid function. The better your thyroid is operating, the higher your metabolism will be, and the easier it will be to stay lean. Avoiding carbohydrates is one of the most common mistakes that I see thyroid patients make when they're trying to lose weight. And if you want to see the other mistakes that thyroid patients make, then I'd recommend checking out this video next.